Throughout my life, I've faced countless trials, seen war, suffered immense losses, and endured every kind of pain imaginable. But nothing ever cut as deep as the nightmare that began that morning. It was just like any other day at first, until the phone rang. The voice on the other end of the line shattered the fragile peace I had left. My daughter Ava, weak and injured, was lying in a hospital bed. And what I learned next, the truth that came to light, was more horrific than anything I had ever experienced. My family had been attacked by one of the people I trusted most. I couldn't comprehend the betrayal, let alone forgive it. I was prepared to do whatever it took to make them pay for what they had done to my family. This was my story now, and this would be the final chapter of their mistakes. I've always been a disciplined man. My mornings followed a steady rhythm: coffee, newspaper, a few quiet moments of reflection before heading to work. But that morning, everything felt off. The coffee was burnt, my mind was scattered. I felt a strange sense of unease, as if something terrible was about to happen. Then the phone rang. The cold, clinical voice of the hospital worker on the other end sent a chill through me. "Mr. Walker, your daughter Ava is in the emergency room." I can't remember what emotion gripped me in that moment. Panic, fear, anger. Maybe it was all of them, mixed into one overwhelming rush. All I remember is rushing out the door, my heart racing as I threw on my coat and jumped into my truck. Every second of that drive was filled with the worst possible thoughts. My little girl. What had happened to her? When I arrived at the hospital, the glaring light burned my eyes, but I barely noticed. I marched straight to the front desk, my voice trembling as I demanded to know where Ava was. They led me to her room, and the moment I saw her lying there, battered and broken, my world crumbled around me. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen shut. She kept her hands tucked under the blanket, hiding what I feared was a body covered in marks of the abuse she had suffered. Seeing her like that, so vulnerable, tore me apart. I sat beside her and took her hand, afraid that even my touch might cause her more pain. Her tears, those eyes full of unspeakable sorrow, pierced my soul. "What happened, sweetheart?" I managed to ask, my voice thick with emotion. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Daddy, I came home early from Sarah's. I heard noises upstairs, coming from your bedroom. I crept up quietly to look. Mom and Uncle Rick." She faltered, but her words were enough. The pain in her voice told me everything I needed to know. 23 years of marriage, countless memories, a home I thought was built on trust. It all shattered in an instant, but it didn't end there. "They saw me," Ava continued, her voice barely a whisper. "Rick, he had his men. They threw me down the stairs. Then they laughed. Drinking your whiskey." Each word hit me like a bullet. My own wife, Eleanor, the mother of my children, and my brother-in-law, Rick. Not only had they betrayed me by being together, but they had also hurt my daughter. They had desecrated my home, the one place I thought was safe, the place I'd fought to build for us. I stood up, a single thought consuming me. They would pay for this. I knew Rick's past, the shady dealings he was involved in. I had always suspected something was off, but now I had undeniable proof. I pulled out my phone and dialed an old contact from Kandahar, someone who owed me a favor. "I need everything you can find on Rick Thorne," I told him, my voice cold. "And I mean everything." At that moment, I made a choice. I was Thomas Walker, and I wouldn't rest until I made them pay for the pain they caused my daughter. They had crossed a line, and no matter how dark or dangerous it became, I wouldn't stop until they were exposed for what they were. When I returned home, nothing felt the same. The house that had once been a sanctuary now seemed foreign, like a place filled with ghosts. Every room, every piece of furniture, seemed to mock me. I couldn't escape the memory of what had happened here. I went upstairs to our bedroom, my heart heavy with rage and disbelief. I started searching, looking for any shred of evidence that could confirm Ava's story. The bed was unmade. An empty whiskey bottle lay on the floor. The air reeked of cigarette smoke, something I had never allowed in this house. The disrespect was like a knife to my gut. Rick and Eleanor, wherever they were, must have thought they were safe, but they were wrong. I could still feel her face in my mind. Eleanor, the loving wife, the devoted mother. She had smiled in my face for years, all the while hiding a knife behind her back. The thought of her in that bed, betraying me like that, made me sick to my stomach. Who was she? Had I been the only one holding this marriage together? The phone rang again. But I didn't care. My mind was already set. I had a new purpose now, and nothing would stop me from uncovering the full truth. Nothing would keep me from making them pay. I paused for a moment, the weight of the decision heavy in the silence, but I answered the phone anyway. "Walker," I said, my voice steady, though my mind raced. "It's time to repay my debt." The voice on the other end was familiar, an old contact from Kandahar. "Rick Thorne, right? He's tangled deep in some shady business. He's in a hole, and I'll find what you need, but be careful. This guy has connections." "If he has connections, I have more," I replied, my tone unyielding. I wasn't just a man seeking revenge now. I was taking control. This was my story, and it would unfold by my rules. The next morning, I set my plan in motion. I had to know who Rick really was and what he was involved in. But first, I needed to ensure Ava's safety. I arranged for her to stay with Sarah's family, determined that she would never be in harm's way again. As I said goodbye to her, she looked up at me with those wide, trusting eyes. "Promise me, Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking but laced with a quiet determination. "You won't let this go, will you?" "I promise," I said, my voice firm, unwavering. "I'll make everyone who hurt you pay." Before I went to Rick's house, I reached out to a few trusted contacts. I learned about his men, 2 hired thugs, nothing more than hired muscle. I was ready to confront them. Every skill I had honed in the military would come into play now. But this time, the battlefield wasn't some foreign land. It was the place I called home. When I arrived at Rick's house, the sounds of laughter and loud music echoed from inside. He was drinking my whiskey, celebrating, as if nothing had happened. As I stepped inside, I kept my footsteps light. But my heart was a raging storm, a volcano ready to erupt. I found them in the living room. Eleanor was slouched on the couch, half drunk, and Rick stood with a glass in hand, laughing, while his bodyguards lounged nearby, relaxed and unaware. The moment I saw them, my blood boiled. The time for talking was over. "This ends now," I said in a cold, firm voice. My words cut through the music like a blade. Rick turned, his face twisting into a mocking smirk. "Tom, welcome home. But looks like you're too late." That was the moment I acted. Years of pent-up fury exploded in a single instant. One of the guards lunged at me, but I dropped him with a single precise move. The other reached for his gun, but I neutralized him before he could even aim. Rick's face drained of color. Fear swept through his eyes as I walked toward him. "You're going to pay for everything," I said, my voice low, filled with an unrelenting promise. Eleanor screamed, "Tom, stop, please." But I didn't stop. The heat of betrayal still burned in my veins, and I couldn't turn back now. "How can I trust you, Eleanor?" I said, never once looking at her. "You and Rick betrayed this family. This is the end for both of you." I grabbed Rick by the collar, slamming him against the wall. "Wasn't it enough that you hurt Ava? Now you're trying to ruin my life, too." Rick mumbled something, but I didn't care. His words were meaningless. That night was just the beginning. Justice had been awakened, and I, Thomas Walker, would show no mercy. I would forgive no one, especially not those who threatened my family. The next day, I called my old friend Mac. "You won't believe what I've got," I said, knowing he could hear the determination in my voice. Our conversation was brief but clear. I needed Mac's connections to expose Rick's financial operations. Every illegal deal he had made, I would trace it. As Mac worked on his end, I decided to track down one of Rick's bodyguards. I had to confront him. The moment they heard Ava, they signed their own death warrants. Meeting with the guard was part of my plan. I extracted valuable information, confirming Rick's shady activities. I recorded everything. With this, I had enough evidence to dismantle Rick's entire operation. Finally, I gathered all the evidence and set my plan into motion. I prepared documents to send to Rick's business partners, clients, and everyone else who protected him. These files would expose the true nature of his criminal dealings. Once they were out, there would be nowhere left for Rick to hide. By the end of the day, I returned home, where Ava lay in bed, still recovering from the trauma she'd endured. I sat beside her, taking her hand in mine. "It's all being taken care of," I said softly. "No one will ever hurt you again." She looked at me, those same innocent eyes of hers, filled with trust. "I believe in you, Dad," she said. Those words, her belief in me, were all the confirmation I needed that I was doing the right thing. Rick, Eleanor, and the entire corrupt network they'd built crumbled, piece by piece. Rick's money and reputation were destroyed. Eleanor disappeared into her own solitude, leaving her past behind her. But for me, this wasn't just about seeking revenge. It was a lesson to anyone who had ever doubted me. Those who tried to break me, who thought they could bring me down, learned one very important thing. You can't destroy Thomas Walker. Because I don't just survive, I bury my enemies.